Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us to celebrate International Women's Day. I'm Nikki. I'm the Financial Controller here at MPowered Mortgages. And I'm here just to welcome you all and to thank our wonderful panel for joining us today. We're very grateful you've all taken the time to, out of your diaries, to be with us and participate and discuss some incredibly important topics. We feel really proud and privileged to have such brilliant, inspiring women on this panel involved in this webinar. So I just wanted to say there's one lady, Noelle, who cannot join us, but everyone else is here. And thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time. I'll now hand over to Nicola Crawford, who will be chairing the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks for everyone for joining us for today's topic, which is inspiring inclusion, empowering women in finance and technology. I'd like to start today's discussion with what do we mean by inclusion and what are the different dimensions of inclusion, because we want to set the basis for the rest of the conversation. So welcome to my esteemed panel. Each of the panel members will introduce themselves as they speak. I'm firstly going to speak and ask Nousheen to give me her views on what she understands to be covered by inclusion and the different dimensions of inclusion. Thanks, Nousheen.
Thanks very much, Nicola. Hi, everyone. I'm Nousheen Hassan. I'm a Director of Risk Management at Thornton. I guess from my perspective, when it comes to inclusion, it's about making sure that women and generally everybody is integrated, whether it be within the workplace, whether it be in society. Everyone's been given a fair chance to be able to represent themselves. And it's important that access is available to all as well on a fair basis, and it's a balanced. So, recognizing people's contributions, women's contributions, recognizing the differences, but also the value that they can bring, whether it be, like I said, in society, workplace, or whichever area really of life. I think it's important to make sure that happens.
Yeah. So you've talked about different types of access, which I think also people look bound up with this scope of inclusion discussion. I think different types of access, you might look at cultural, political, educational. Karen, what's your views on the types of different dimensions of inclusion if we talk about accessibility?
For me, it's about obviously backgrounds. So you've got the social mobility side of things as well. I think also it's race, religion, and creed for me. I think that's quite important. And it's making sure that you've got equal well, not necessarily equal, but you've got representation from various different communities. Everybody has got a story to tell, and they've learned from their experience historically. So for me, it's a little bit of everything, and I think that's important. And that can help you, especially if you're building a team, for example, in how you benefit from those expertise from people's time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, if we extend this discussion to think about the significance of inclusion for women in leadership and entrepreneurship and how profound that might be, Sarah, do you have a view on in these areas and the challenges for women when we talk about empowerment and equity in different contexts?
Yeah, so I think certainly when it comes to equality versus equity, I think that is really the key. And I think when we talk about inclusion and equality, we tend to think that everyone needs to be given the same opportunities and the same resources, and that's what's being equal. Actually, in my experience, especially, everybody is different. Everybody needs different things, and it's about recognizing what every single person needs and then giving them different opportunities, different resources, different circumstances to allow them the same opportunity to speak and use their voice. And trust is such a big part of that. How we manage people is such a big part of that. And the space that we create, a space of trust, a space where people feel safe to actually say what's within them. And I can only speak from my own experience that somebody would call me an entrepreneur now. I still wouldn't call myself that. I was just given the safe space to explore what was deep within me in terms of ideas, seeds of an idea. And that's what's translated to a business now. And who knows what other businesses are out there, because certainly if there's one in me, there must be one in so many others that perhaps they just haven't had the right space to actually explore. So yeah, a bit of a varied answer there, but I think that difference between equity and equality is really key to understand.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, you talked there about you felt like you weren't labelled as an entrepreneur. I mean, we do have this labelling, and sometimes as women, we don't feel like we deserve to be in a different in the spot we're in. Nikita, have you got a view on imposter syndrome? I think is the name that we give to where, you know, we feel that we don't deserve to be in a position.
I struggle with that almost daily. I think with imposter syndrome, I think most people do struggle with it, and it's obviously where you feel as though you're not as competent or you're not as intelligent as maybe you make yourself out to be. And I struggle daily, I think sometimes, especially within my organisation, and the people above me being men, a little bit older, and they've been in the industry a lot longer than I have. So when I look at my position and where I am within the business, and that's quite a significant step in my career over the last 10 years, I sometimes think to myself, how on earth did I get here? Is it just a fluke? I think sometimes you just have to take that step away and make sure that you remind yourself all of the good things and all of the achievements that you have made to be able to get to that position that you are in. And I think it's a good thing. I remember not so long ago, I messaged my CEO and my boss to say, do you guys ever get imposter syndrome? Is it just me? And they both said, yeah, we do. And it's actually something that shows that you care. It shows that you always want to be the best that you can be. And having that imposter syndrome is natural. It's not, you're not a fraud. You definitely are intelligent. I think sometimes you can just look at people that are around you and think, I don't look like one of those people. I'm not old enough to be where I'm meant to be, but definitely when you look back and through my experience, especially over the last 12 years, there's a reason why I'm here and where I am in my career. So you sometimes just have to take a step back and give yourself a little bit of slack.
Exactly. Mabine, how do you ever feel like you've imposter syndrome at all?
All the time. So thanks, Nicola. I'm Mabine from Mortgage Advice, I'm new homes director there. Actually, going back to what Sarah had mentioned as well about inclusivity, just going back to the basic, I feel it's beyond race, religion, gender. Actually, regardless of your social background, regardless of your cultural background and your upbringing, one should be able to bring their true self to work. I think that's really important, and having an environment of work where you're appreciated and you're recognized, but also an effort from your workplace to invest in you and learn about you as an individual, and we should be accepted regardless of our social background, ethnicity, etc. I think we need to broaden that definition or label as such, because we should be able to turn up to work in an organization and be accepted for who and bring our true self to that. And I felt sometimes, and going back to what Nikita had mentioned, actually, you sometimes feel as a female, we all suffer from, and I honestly think it's probably more women who feel the imposter syndrome and, you know, are we good enough to be where we are? Are what we're doing good enough? And I feel we kind of lack that confidence. And maybe I'm generalizing, but I definitely think men are a little bit different in that way. And we're probably more critical of ourselves. And when we've been to a meeting, we come out thinking, oh, did I do okay? I definitely agree with what Sarah had mentioned, and also what Nikita had said about imposter syndrome, and also feeling, earlier on in my career, I've been in the industry now 20 years, but back when I was a lot younger, I definitely felt like, am I as good enough as everyone else, or have you got to look a certain way? Have I got to be wearing a grey pinstripe suit to be acceptable? I can't wear makeup. You know, you've got to be, do I have to look a certain way to be acceptable and taken seriously? By other men in the organization or in the industry? Have I got to look a certain way? And I think now, looking back at my career, I really did. Obviously, I'm much older now, but I have that confidence to be I'm happy in my own skin, and I'm happy to present myself. But I wish I felt like that when I was younger, because you almost want to be a certain way to integrate and be acceptable and be acceptable in the workplace as well.
Yeah, I think I'm very lucky with where I am today. I think if I look over the last 12 years and been with 27 Tech for the last 3 years, it's the first company I think that's really encouraged me to be me. And they allow me to be who I am as a person and take all of my quirks and weirdness alongside it. And that's what's made me much more confident. And if you look back at maybe me 3 years ago, I definitely wasn't out there speaking about my achievements. I wasn't shouting about all the good things that I've done, but now I feel confident enough to do that. And I think that comes from the organisation that I work for as well, because without them, I don't think I'd feel like I could talk about all those good things. So it's definitely within an organisation, you need the good people that are giving you, cheerleading you from the side as well.
It's an interesting one. It's an interesting one because Mobeen mentioned about dress, and I remember when I started in the industry, and I'm going to say 20 plus years ago. So I'm not saying how many. I'm just going to get it out there.
We're showing our ages now, aren't we?
I know. Thankfully, the industry has changed massively, which is great, and and we're still making positive steps, and there's still a lot more to go. But I remember my first manager, who was a woman, turned around and said, "You're coming into an incredibly male-dominated industry. The expectation is that you will wear trouser suits. You will wear, if you do wear a dress or a skirt, please make sure it's longer than your knee, etc., and so on and so forth. No low-cut tops, no this, no that." And I was like going, gosh, it's like having a school uniform for work. Whereas now it's kind of like, things have moved on, they have progressed. So, I remember when I started, every single gentleman that you went to have a conversation with had a shirt, tie and a suit on. The open neck collar was not allowed, kind of thing. And I think that's where we are. I think, working together, I think, we have changed it. And I think a lot of what we've probably done as women behind the scenes is actually helped change that and helped progress that. We might not have shouted about our achievements, but I think actually they're small wins as far as I'm concerned.
I think it's interesting you say that, Karen, because I've actually experienced the right opposite when I first started in the industry.
Wow, okay.
So I guess when I was much younger, and the expectation was in a couple of my first roles, the expectation from the leadership within those various firms was, women would be wearing high heels, they would be wearing skirts, so quite different actually to what you experienced. And I thought to myself, gosh, that's a little bit, of a stereotypical approach, isn't it? And then slowly, as time went on, things obviously changed. And yes, I think we're in a much better place now where we absolutely can bring our true selves to work, like Mobeen was just saying. And it's just important I think it also boils down to company culture. Yeah. If you're setting the right culture and you are absolutely inviting women to be them, not just women, but everybody to be their true selves, then you're just going to get the best, right? And it's about the people in the firm that make the firm. So yeah, I think it's quite a range of perceptions and lenses. Yeah.
Interestingly, so very good points everyone's raised. And just to go back to the imposter syndrome and the way that we just talked to some examples there of, number of years ago when we were younger, how exploring why we feel or we're made to feel that way actually is important. And so I think if we look at what are the barriers to inclusion, right, you start to get a view as to why we're made to act in certain ways or why we respond in certain ways or think in certain ways. Because, as I said, there's bias built into education, politics, because up until quite recently, that was all male domain.
Yeah.
Right. So, policies being written for women by men. Right. Now, of course, and I'm from a very narrow socioeconomic background. Obviously, it's much better now. We've got more diversity. But I think it's still something I'd like to explore with the panel, just to understand what do you believe the barriers are? Because obviously later on we're going to look at what can we do moving forward to obviously solutions to progress inclusion. But I'd be very interested to hear, first of all, how can we understand what is sort of embedded within societal norms, infrastructure, and that perpetuate gender inequalities? How do we find out those things, and what are the actual barriers that we will find by looking at, for example, review of policy?
I think for me personally, coming from a South Asian background, the cultural dimension there in Asia is very much, the woman is the caretaker at home. There are barriers to education in some of those countries for girls. Let's go right back to when you're children, right? And the differences when how you're taught to be a girl and how you're taught to be a boy, and what you are exposed to. The access for education, even more recently, in places like, for example, Afghanistan and Pakistan, for instance, you've got maybe parents or families that think, actually, no, girls don't need to be educated to a certain level, or they need to stop because otherwise they'll become too educated, and that's not going to be right to find a suitable husband, for example. Or you've got policies and political policies where there are those barriers to women actually thriving, whether it be in education, whether it be at work. In a lot of those countries, you still go into the working environment, and it's still very male dominated, and they're still trying to progress in those areas. So it's coming right back down to home and the cultural norms, definitely for me. And then you then extend that out to policies, whether it be government, whether it be then financial security. So if you're a woman and you're working, for instance, even I can say, women working and versus maybe some friends I have, that they are actually still dependent on their husbands for the financial resilience and the economic coming into the household, for example, and it makes it quite difficult. So there are a few of those things that I think we all need to be quite mindful of.
Yeah.
I think the point you made about assumption, it stretches to all sorts of backgrounds, and I think certainly being the mortgage mum or managing director of the mortgage mum, we come across that stereotype all the time. I remember when I first set the business up, and the branding was pink and gold then, and we have just shifted that. But I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, it's nice. You're going to make it like you're making mortgages pink." And I took that, I didn't know even what to do with that comment. I just felt like I didn't have the evidence to actually say that isn't what we're doing. And I had to sort of decide for myself, okay, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make mortgages pretty. I'm trying to bring a completely different type of service that actually recognizes the individual, dives into, more than just the money, and actually brings those natural skills that a woman has, not to say men don't have them, but those natural skills that maybe weren't celebrated before, and bring them to the forefront and make them the most important thing to completely change the type of clients that then come and feel comfortable to come to you. Because like you said, Nousheen, it starts at home, whether that is the male-female relationship at home as mum and dad, if you are parents, and then it stretches to who deals with the finances, who feels comfortable to go to the mortgage broker. Well, if the mortgage broker is a man in a suit, 3 hours in a bank, well, that's the husband's job. He can do that. And that's what we were trying to do, is open a window to a brand new way of working, but also that couple can decide for themselves who's most ambitious here, who wants to be working more, who wants to be at home more, without mum guilt or dad guilt, or dads that are wanting to be staying at home a week, and the mums are ruthless that want to go out to work and aren't normal types of mums. These are all stereotypes that working mothers and women that are wondering whether to be a mother and dads experience all the time, just those assumptions. And we've only just begun to unpick those with, people like Mother Pucker, who's got that bill in Parliament. We're just starting to unpick it, but it goes so deep, and the conditioning is so ancestral. It's in our bones, this stuff, So, yeah, it's interesting, I think, those stereotypes, those assumptions that we as women that have a voice, us here, we're very, we have a voice, and we must use it to really not just celebrate where we're at now, but really unpick for other businesses or other people that haven't really thought about it that deeply, the things that are embedded in us that we don't even know are there. And I've just had a baby, and I can admit to you now, the first thing I thought is, what is everyone going to think? And I work with a team of women who I believe I've led to try and break down these barriers, but that's still in me of, oh, am I going to lose what I've built? Am I going to unpick so much of the milestones I've had in my career? So for me to feel that as the leader of a business that's designed to unpick this stuff, I can't imagine what other people feel when they're in that position. And And thankfully, I've got, evidence and support around me that means I could override that quite quickly. But I do feel for those people that perhaps can't do that or haven't got the resource or support network to actually unpick that themselves.
That's so true, these barriers. Sorry.
Go on,
Go ahead. I was just going to say, it's so true. And these barriers do still exist. Did I talk over you? I'm really sorry.
No, go for it.
I mean, back to what Nicola had said, how do we identify these barriers? And microaggressions and discrimination and everyday sexism exists. And I know Nousheen had mentioned about what's happening internationally. However, just a few days ago, I read an article in the Financial Times about a lady in the city, a CEO, in the banking industry, and it mentioned nearly 2/3 of women have experienced everyday sexism or microaggressions in the workplace and having to provide more evidence of their competence. And I think for sure many women can relate to that as well. And in particular, what resonated with me was providing more evidence of your competence in particular, compared to other male counterparts. And I think those barriers, like Sarah had mentioned, they're embedded and they're cultural, but they still exist. Even today in the city, no matter what industry you're in, these exist, and we need to do whatever we can collectively to break down those barriers and those microaggressions that exist.
Yeah. I was just going to mention that some of the barriers there, I think especially for me, is seeing that there's not enough women in leadership roles. So I think when we look at, and going back to what Sarah said, and the things that women can bring to a workforce, we're much more, I would say, caring, attentive, we've got empathy. Not to say men don't have that, they absolutely do, but there's different ways in which we can bring that into a working environment. So I think there's ways in which, if we were to see that there was more women in leadership roles that are making those decisions, we would feel much more represented. So we would, again, going back to the imposter syndrome, probably feel less of the imposter syndrome, because we can see that there's women, inspiring women, in roles that we want to get to. And I think going back to what Sarah said as well, in terms of being a mom and a dad, that's also very much a barrier. And I know I mentioned this to you guys on the call, so as I say, I don't mind mentioning it, but I recently made a decision not to have a baby. And I think a lot of that is more to do with career and progression, and being a little bit scared and apprehensive of where I am in my career and where I want to get to, and would that stop me from getting there? And I think that's still a barrier that we need to overcome. And the only way in which we're going to overcome that, and there's lots of women out there that will decide they don't ever want to be a mum, but for me, I do. But in the future, just it wasn't the right time for me now. But I think looking at policies and looking at ways in which we can make sure it's equal for both mums and dads, to have shared maternity, paternity. It was really difficult for me to look at, okay, in 9 months' time, I'll need to take maternity, but I'm at the peak of my career. What's that going to look like if I come back to work? Have my opportunities then are they no longer going to be around? There was lots of different thoughts and decisions that needed to be made around that decision. And I think it'd be much more easier to make a decision and decide being a mum at whatever time in your career would be okay to do, if there were policies in place to help support women and men in being that shared mum and dad. If we look back at, growing up, and it was mum stays at home, she does everything, looks after the child, does all the housework, dad goes away, and he's the breadwinner. But actually there's a lot of successful women, just like those women that are on the call, that don't really want to say, I need to pick, do I need to be a mum, or do I be a successful woman? So being able to have both of those things would be amazing, but I don't think we're there just yet, where people can be confident, okay, now's the right time. So there's lots and lots of things that we need to still get better at, but yeah.
And as I said, it makes me so, because this is what I advocate for, I feel so sad, personally sad, that you didn't have that person, I suppose, to look at and actually give you evidence that it doesn't have to be the reality now or in the future, and making sure we change that narrative for the men in our life as well, if we are, in our partners, because we don't we all suffer from stereotyping. You know, everybody suffers because everybody's trying to fit themselves into a template that inside doesn't resonate with them bringing their truest selves. And Mabine, I think you said it's about being your truest self.
Yeah.
And if you feel you can't do that, we will blend and mold and push stuff down that could be the innovation of the future that's sitting in the pit of women's stomachs all around the country because they're too scared to say it because it doesn't fit with the current mold that they're used to. And men, you know, I know my husband would love to be a stay-at-home dad. He would love it. He'd absolutely love it. But that conversation we're having to create that role model, and our parents have opinions, and our, you know, our peers, because it's different. And it's like, oh yeah, well, you know, the narrative is, well, she's so ambitious. He's kind of, you know, he's having to support her. No, he'd love it. He'd absolutely love it. This is not about me. This is about us. And again, that's stereotyping the woman who isn't always at the school gate or isn't on top of the trillion emails the schools send because we have other priorities. But then the old school conditioning comes in again, and you feel bad and you feel, oh, does it make me less of a mum because they're looking at me differently and they're fellow women? If we break this down for everyone, we're all free. But the problem is, because there's only select pockets of us who are allowed to by our partners or our jobs or our firms, we then pick on the ones that can, because that's what women have been conditioned to do for centuries. You know, if you want to get there, you climb over those 10 women to get there. You can't get there with them. And we are the ones that have to change it. And it rises up in us, and we have to be the ones that, like we said earlier, pick it apart, rewrite the manual so that people like you, Nikita, don't have that, you know, clouded feeling, and make a decision that's an empowered choice, not a choice based on anything other than your own power to decide.
Yeah. So I mean, look, the personal stories and experiences are a very, very strong motivator and message to people. I mean, I was quite lucky when I had my son. I was quite older. I was 41, and we took a practical financial decision that I would go back to work, and I did when he was 6 weeks old. But I was lucky working for a bank in Australia that had a breastfeeding room and a partner that actually brought the baby to me every time he needed to be fed.
Wow, that's amazing.
I was really, really lucky that I was able to go back to work because I was earning quite a lot of money, more than my husband at the time. So yeah, that was a practical decision. I think the only outcome of that, though, was that he was supposed to go back to work when the child was 3 years old, and he didn't go back until he was 8. But being the stay-at-home dad, just a little bit too much. But that's good. It was good. But what I'm saying is, stories and experiences are very, very strong for, you know, portraying some of the barriers. And I think actually talking to people is the best way to find out what these discriminations are, because you'll find a pattern emerging. Karen, did you want to comment on before I move on to the next topic?
I was going to say, I mean, I went back to work after when my eldest son was 4 months old. And part of the reason for that was there was no way I could have another conversation about which type of nappy was the best nappy. And I'd had enough coffee mornings and all that sort of stuff. So I needed to go back for my own sanity and actually to have that company and have an adult conversation. You know, I remember my husband came in and he said, "How was your day today?" And I remember saying to him, "Yeah, he's done 3 poos and he's done," and I'm like going, "What on earth am I doing?" So, you know, I think we've all probably had those conversations. So I went back really early after my first son, but when I had my second son, I took a longer period of time out, because I felt it was important to do that, because my older son had started school and there was a big change. So there was a lot of change going on at that time in both of their lives. I'm very thankful that my 2 boys are incredibly close with each other. We have the odd bicker every now and then because we've got Kevin and Perry in our house at the moment. Long may that. I'm hoping he'll move out soon enough. But I think what everybody has said is absolutely right. I mean, and I also look at my mum. She's like my mentor, and you know, I remember things where my mum was a single parent, so you know, she did everything. So actually, I then, when I had my children, felt that I had to do everything, you know, and that life balance and that juggling of work. And, you know, I mean, it was like a military operation. Bags were ready the night before, all that sort of stuff. And if my husband tried to interfere, and I use the word interfere, you know, with my what my task was that particular evening, I used to just say, leave me be, let me get on with it, because that's what I needed to do. So yeah, so I think it's one of those. I think the other thing for me is, as women, I don't think we promote ourselves enough. I don't think we shout out and say to our fellow sisters, fantastic, well done. You know, it's like, as Sarah made a comment, and it struck with me, where she said, you know, I've got to climb over 10 other women to get there. And that's how a lot of people have felt in the past. I think we've got better. Could we do more? Absolutely. Absolutely, we can shout out, you know, and I think it's important that we do. So, you know, so I think, you know, I look forward to the day when we don't have to have an International Women's Day, because actually we are all celebrating everybody all of the time. But, you know, I don't think that will happen in my lifetime. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think personally, COVID was actually an enabler to inclusion for women.
Definitely.
Right? I don't know if
I get that. Yeah.
If anybody disagrees, please tell. And I'll tell you why. Because all of a sudden, organisations, to keep going, had to make technology available remotely.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think technology can be a good enabler to enabling inclusion.
100%, Nicola. I mean, it was exactly what you've just said. I think it goes beyond just women as well.
Of course.
In terms of what COVID has done, the whole transition. I remember talking to somebody just prior to COVID, a business owner in the industry, and she had mentioned that when she recruits somebody, a mortgage advisor, that she would look at whether she could actually, on a social basis, have a drink with them. And if she felt she could have a drink with them, you know, that was part of the interviewing process, etc. But the fact that you just mentioned the change in COVID massively has had an impact, because the social barriers are not there anymore. You know, the fact that you can socially engage with somebody or not is not relevant. COVID has changed that. Technology has changed that. So you are really being hired for the right reasons. Are you good at your job? Do you have that talent, rather than the other social aspects to it? Whether you drink or whether you smoke, etc. All these things aren't relevant on the back of what's happened.
Yeah.
I love that. It's so interesting. Go on, Nousheen.
No, I was just going to say, it's interesting though, Mabeen, the way you mentioned, you know, that was a female who actually took, you know, a potential recruitee out for a drink and decided whether they were right or not. And I just kind of, that makes me think, well, hang on, that was a female. What's going on about women trying to support women, you know, and sometimes you don't always see that. I've you know, I think that's a big barrier actually, that we sometimes just don't always acknowledge enough, that, you know, women, it is sometimes about stepping over one another or feeling threats, and actually it shouldn't be like that. We should be helping each other.
We should empower each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I find that so interesting and so true. I mean, as somebody who probably has never publicly said this, but those who know me really well know I've never drunk, really. You know, I think I've had maybe 2 drinks in a row, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, I don't really want to do this. And that kind of culture, I know it's a very different topic, but that culture always was a barrier for me when I was working in law. You know, it was, again, the children was the thing as well. Like, can you go out for a drink and be fun and enjoyable? Not really. Like, I'm your girl to have a deep conversation. It's not really pub friendly. And I was very uncomfortable, anxious, like, you know, might as well just look really awkward. But I had a lot to say, and I never had the environments to say it. The business was set up online, but obviously COVID just helped facilitate that, so that it wasn't such a barrier with BDMs, lenders, everyone really in the end. And it suited me, other than the health concerns and the obvious suffering that we had, you know, and there was lots that we missed socially. Actually, you know, a lot of my confidence and my profile was built in that time, and it was done purely through technology. We managed our team completely online, and I was able to show up organically, authentically, without those barriers stopping me. And now, you know, I wouldn't force myself into that template of having to stand with a drink, because I know you're not going to get the best out of me, you know. And actually I'm not suited to that environment. So hearing you say that just validated that for me, and it highlights again just another angle that I hadn't really considered in the basis of this conversation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's so, I mean, look, as I said, technology to me is an enabler. So, you know, obviously working remotely enables inclusion across the board, not just from a gender perspective. I think also because you've got online education these days, right? So, you know, does anybody else want to comment on other examples of where technology might be an enabler to inclusion?
I mean, for instance, you know, if whether you're a mum or not, generally for mums or for dads, I think where we've got now this hybrid working, it's great because say you have to do school runs or you have certain things, you can actually work around that with the tech helping you now. Whereas before, I think pre-COVID, there was this expectation from most firms, from most CEOs, that you have to be at your desk in the office 5 days a week to be able to show that you're actually working. Whereas now, I know the firm that I work for is actually brilliant in terms of, you know, the flexibility and the work-life balance for all people that are working there. But as long as you get your work done and you're making your hours up, whether that be at 12 o'clock at night, you know, there is no judgment. And that's and it's helped through technology, because just because you're at a desk for 5 days a week doesn't mean you're necessarily being productive. It could be the opposite, actually. So I think on that basis, absolutely. And I think also the other thing about technology, however, on the flip side, where we're looking at a world of AI right now, there's the huge risk around biases around some of the tech that's out there. So you don't have a lot of women, and there's a slight slant on what you're saying, Nicola, what the question is, Nicola, but it's really about the female kind of representation across industries like technology, you know, coding, data analysts. A lot of those are male dominated. And where now we're getting technology that is, you know, you've got algorithms, you've got coding and parameterization around some of that technology being done by men, then there's that risk of, okay, the bias, because females aren't being represented necessarily, you know, like our iPhones and even social media and how that's all being coded. I'm not saying that there's going to be biases there, but it's how do you assure yourselves that there isn't that bias there, for example, and how do you assure yourselves that women have been at the table having the discussions to actually contribute to building some of those products. So that's the other kind of threat, or, you know, the other side of the coin, if you like, of having to consider.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, technology also enables for us to build communities of knowledge and networking online. And I think that's quite significant. I mean, over the last 5 years, I've built my LinkedIn network to 20-some thousand people, which I never thought I would have that many. Never. Yeah. Right? Do I engage with every single one of those? No, because at the end of the day, you don't know everybody. I try to obviously go because it's a business platform, but then there is the other side of it. So we were discussing earlier about, you know, how many that I do get sexually harassed on LinkedIn. I get messages from guys that seem to think it's a social platform, right? You know, online harassment. At least, you know, you can say no. So whether it be Facebook or Instagram or whatever you're using, there was always some comments. I mean, I remember during COVID, I was doing masks with special little designs on them, and I got trolled. You were trying to expose vulnerable people during the pandemic. I was actually vulnerable myself. I didn't have a job, and I was just trying to make some money in an environment where I also felt like I was trying to help. So there's that negative side of it as well. I mean, I don't know, Nikita, have you experienced any of that type of thing when you've been using technology?
I think for the most part, it's been positive. It's allowed me to build my kind of own brand, should I say. I use the technology much more now just to advocate myself. Obviously, the firm that I work for, I use it a lot to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, other areas in which I'm passionate about, just to bring more awareness is around mental health, OCD, ADHD, and I think that's helped me build a lot of strong relationships across the industry, because I personally feel like by being open and honest, that's where I build my relationships. People can trust me as a person. So I've managed to use that to my advantage, but there are definitely barriers. I've also had harassment messages on the way that I look, the way that I've dressed. I've had comments on different dresses that I've worn to awards dues by men. So it does have a negative impact as well, but I tend to just disregard it, don't really take too much notice of it. So there's definitely really positive things that I've taken from technology, and a lot of how I've been able to develop over the last 3 years, as well as being able to utilize it for educational purposes. So just making sure I'm enrolled on different courses. I've recently done a management course as well, just to make sure I'm bringing the best version of myself to my team. So there's lots of different ways in which I've been able to make use of it. I think going back to the comments around COVID as well, I think there was a barrier for me, I believe, when I joined 27 Tech, because I joined 3 years ago now, hired during COVID. I was a young woman coming into the industry. Although I've worked in the industry for a long time, it was a new role. And I was having to build relationships with a lot of key stakeholders across lots of different lender relationships, and a lot of them were men. So when I was going out to introduce myself, emailing, asking to set up Zoom calls, I was being ignored. And I've always said, I don't know if that's just me maybe thinking too much into it. Is it just because I'm a woman? Is it because of the way I look? Is it because I'm too young? I don't look like maybe my boss, who I was taking over, in terms of those relationships. And he's a man, and he's, in his 30s, very well experienced. And I thought maybe it's just because they see me as a woman. But again, you never know. But I think that's where I came across a barrier of where tech in COVID times did really, I would say it wasn't as positive as I would have liked it to be, especially coming into a new role and trying to build those relationships. For me, what's worked over the last 3 years is just getting out there and speaking to people. But then on the flip side, with me being so open and honest and utilizing LinkedIn as I do to share my own personal experiences, that's where I've been able to build a lot of, really good relationships where people can relate to me. So there's pros and cons to both, but definitely more ups than downs.
Yeah.
I definitely think that's true. And also what we have to acknowledge is we no longer have to wait to be given the microphone. We no longer have to be invited into the boardroom. We can just say what we want and put it out there. And if you want to listen to it, great. And if you want to ignore it and scroll past, you can. But you should really see it as an opportunity to say what you perhaps wish you could say in a room, but maybe you've not been invited into that room yet, or say what you wish you could say on a podium to a room full of people that need to hear it, but perhaps you haven't got that speaker gig yet because you haven't actually got that profile. So everyone has the opportunity, I think, to show their truest selves and to use their voice in platforms for free, and have people that don't know them, have never met them, listen to those deepest thoughts and then really resonate. And that's where you build your true people, your true tribe, your true clients, your true team, because they know the true essence of you, not the edited version that you might actually use if you were invited into the board and they said, "Hi Sarah, tell us what you think about this today on this lovely Friday. What are your innermost thoughts?" There's no way I'd do what I post when I post deep and wonderful things. I wouldn't. I would think, what do you want me to say? And then I'll try and tailor my response to that. And even with this, you saw us all do it. You brought us in, Nicola, and just softened us all up, because we were all like, what do you want us to say, Nicola? When people, that's what we do as women. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And even that shows so much, because we're a room full of women to talk about being a woman. And we're like, what if I talk about being a woman wrong to the rest of the people? It is an opportunity to say how you really feel, as long as you can cope with, like you say, the negative implications, because there will be. And I'm not saying just men. There are women who haven't got the new agenda that we're trying to lift each other up and lift as we climb, not tear each other down. They don't know that yet. They haven't learnt that for themselves yet. They're still protecting themselves. But often you do get those awful messages from men that are not appropriate, that I don't quite know how best to handle still now. And and you have to be, ready that you will expose yourself. And what they'll say is, well, yeah, if you get that message, that's what happens if you put yourself out there. Well, no, that's not
No,
fair.
shouldn't.
Same thing again, isn't it? Oh, if you won't be quiet, that's what happens, ladies. So
Sarah, you're putting yourself and Nikita putting so much positivity out there. I've seen your post, and actually, I may not comment or say anything, but internally, I'm thinking, wow, do you know what? From a mental health perspective, I'm not the only one who's suffering from that or thinking of that. You're actually you have the confidence and the guts to put something out there, which maybe me or somebody else wouldn't. And the fact that you're voicing your opinion and using your platform and using your own voice, it's massive. It takes a lot of guts to do that. I don't have those guts, but the fact that you do that, and I feel like it's commendable and it's massively respectable, because I'll be feeling that, and I think you're touching more people than you actually know. So I think more positivity to your reach than you probably think.
Okay, thank you.
It's sometimes we feel like everything's stacked upon us, and we've had hard and challenging times, but we're still here. We're still soldering on. So I'd suggest that every person on this panel is resilient. And I'd just be interested to hear, we've got sort of 12 minutes left, and I'd like to leave a little bit of time for people to ask some questions on the side. But really, what is resilience about, and how does that contribute to taking action to make sure that we progress the inclusion debate moving forward? Maybe we might want to touch upon governance and leadership as well. So let me start with you, Nousheen. What do you think?
I think resilience is quite a big word, right? I mean, I don't know. I think we always, as women, we don't always share our stories. And I think it's important to, like, going back to the point that Mabeen made, what Nikita said, is it's important to share our stories in order to enable others to understand that they can relate, they're not alone, and there are other people walking that path, and that gives you that self-confidence. So I think for me, resilience is having the confidence to say, you know what, it's okay, I can't do absolutely everything. And personally, it's I have 3 daughters. I have a 4-year-old, a 17-year-old, a 21-year-old, quite a broad range. But for me, it's like getting ready, getting my 4-year-old ready in the morning, getting all her breakfast done, dropping her, getting to work, coming home, sorting out dinner. And it's like constant, and I feel some days I'm like, okay, sometimes I don't give myself a break. And I think to myself, am I doing this properly? But then other days I think, no, actually, you know what? I need to be kind to myself. And I need to say, actually, I'm doing a flipping excellent job of this. And I'm smashing it. And I'm sure there's so many other women out there that are doing absolutely the same as well. And we don't give ourselves enough credit where it's due. We need to be kinder to ourselves. We need to go out there and be confident to say, actually, it's okay to say no sometimes. And I think it's okay to sometimes have a moment to process your emotions and break down, and then come back and be, actually, I'm okay. So yeah, it's just pushing through, but just not being hard on yourself. I think as women, we are way too hard on ourselves.
Yeah. Karen, what's your view? Resilience.
So for me, it's about that. It's that toughness. I think one thing that we all are is that we've all, I'm sure I know I have along my career, I've had knockbacks. And I think it's a case of, what am I learning? So I do sit back and reflect and go, okay, what have I learned from that? What would I do differently? And how would I change that? And it's a case of, if it doesn't make you stronger, then I don't think you've learnt from it the right way. That's how I personally feel. And it's a case of showing that. I mean, we're all great actors and actresses at some point in our career. I've had some horrific phone calls with mortgage intermediaries, etc., over my time, and actually then gone into another appointment, and you'd never know that I've just had somebody absolutely having a go at me for my company not doing what they should have done. This is in previous lives. And I think that's important. I think put that game face on, as I call it, and in you go, and you go, okay, fine. And then afterwards, the bottle of wine goes in the fridge on a Monday, and if I get to touch the wine on the Friday, that's good. But actually, it's a case of the fact that I haven't hit it Monday night or Tuesday night is even better. And 9 times out of 10, to be fair, that bottle of wine is still in the fridge on the Saturday and the Sunday, and it'll be there for the following week. And I think that's important. But it's a case of we do share, but do we share enough? Do we share our learnings, our experiences? And I think that's important to do, and to help. You know, and I've got such a variety of ages in my team, and I've got male and female in my team, and actually to sit and listen to what the younger generation is going through. And I say the younger generation, Nikita, I'm old enough to be your mother. Just want to get that out there, okay? So I'm kind of like going, oh my God, you know. So it's one of those. I discovered that last night, that again, I'm old enough to be the head of our marketing team's mum as well. And actually, her mum is going to be the same age as me, like a couple of weeks later. And I'm like, oh my God, I really am genuinely old enough to be your mum. So that was quite good, you know, but it's quite scary. And I think by sharing and helping and empowering the younger generation and going, do you know what, look, I know you might think it's tough, but, you know, we've moved forward. You know, the advocacy that we've got here on this call, for example, is fantastic. And I think, you know, the fact that we're here today talking about International Women's Day and what that stands for, and talking about things like resilience, etc., I think is great. And I think it's a journey that we're all on. We've all had those challenges. We've all learnt from those challenges, and we need to share those challenges with the next generation.
Yeah, thank you. Nikita.
So I think resilience for me personally is just about practicing really solid values, just being able to be, you know, strong and compassionate, but also have empathy. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is being able to lead with a kind heart, just being able to make sure that I always understand people's values as well, you know, what they're about, and also offer support. I think I've been through a lot of horrific times in my life. I'm nearly 30, but I think I could have enough horrific times in my life for, you know, a lot of older women. So I've got a lot of, I would say, experience behind me. But one of the things that my boss always, he always describes me as is tenacious. And I think that could probably be seen as a good thing or a bad thing. I see it as a good thing. It just means that I'm a go-getter. I won't give up. If I experience anything bad, I'll come back, you know, 10 times better. And I think that's just resilience for me, is being able to overcome those really challenging times and come back as a better version of myself. And just being able to help other people as well. So there's people, you know, that will look to me to be able to say, I'm going through this really tough time. How do we get over it? And what did you do? I think that for me is showing the resilience in a different way, in that people can look to me and say, how did you get over it? So yeah.
I think, you know, the messaging is basically coming back stronger in time from an adverse event. And being, you know, just being able to tough it out. I mean, Sarah, I'm sure from listening to you earlier, you've got lots of experience in this space.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that we get taught that we have to be shown how to be strong, but we're already strong. We are already strong. It's about getting given evidence to actually show you that you're strong. And that's really where resilience comes. It's growth, and you can't grow without challenge. And challenge is awful when you're in it. It's devastating, but it's challenge that builds the people that we all aspire to and that we're inspired by. None of them have had stories that don't involve challenge. So to me, resilience is growth. It's being willing to lean in when you feel those uncomfortable feelings, or where you're going through something difficult, and you don't just put it in a box, which so many generations before us have had to do, put the lid on it and store it somewhere. You lean in, whether that's going through, you know, therapy or whatever that is, self-development. I'm struggling, but now I'm better. That's what growth to me looks like. And that is a really vulnerable experience. But that is what I translate resilience to be in my work.
Mobeen, have you got anything to add before I do the final pitch?
I think, to be honest, such a big question, but I mean, I think there's not much I can add from what everyone else has said, but the only thing I can think of is resilience is different for each individual, and we need to remember that what be resilient to Sarah or Nikita or me or Nousheen would be very different. And I think being kind to each other, when we talk to our colleagues, sometimes I feel, or they may feel, that I'm the stronger one, and what they're suffering or what they're going through may not be as important to us, but we need to understand that each individual's different, their needs and requirements are different, and we need to understand and be kind to each other, and remember that resilience is different for each person, regardless of their upbringing or their gender or their sex, etc.
So I mean, that basically for me, inclusion is very contextual. Yeah. So Sarah, I just want to, before we open up questions for a few minutes to the audience, I'm going to pitch something that you sent through yesterday, which I really loved, right? And you said basically, do you see me? Do you hear me? Do you value me? Right. And I think actually when you're looking forward at how to promote and progress inclusion, we should be asking those as questions. So what actions do we need to take to be heard? Right? What actions need to be taken to be seen, and what actions need to be taken to be valued? Right? And I'm going to finish off on that because we've got 4 minutes left. So I'm just going to put out to the audience now, if you've got any questions, if you could just put them into the comments, and we'll just wait a couple of minutes. And while I'm doing, I'll just sort of do some idle chat. So I think that there's been very, very valuable conversation that we've had today, and I hope that everybody's taken something from the panel. And I want to say thank you very, very much for being very open and honest, and sharing your stories and experiences with us all. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions, so with just a couple of minutes to go, I'm actually going to say thank you to everybody and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. You've been fantastic. Thanks all.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.